A little disclaimer, I call the group and the members of the group weird many times in this video. Please know that I mean this with the greatest fondness and respect. I mean no disrespect and only call them weird as a term of endearment and to easily express how unusual they are in the industry. I love them all. K-pop is a rigid industry and over time has built itself on portraying a perfect, polished image. Not a hair out of place. Of course, there have always been people stepping out of line in one way or another, but the industry generally is known for and prides itself on its polish. This is one of the things that made it so popular and grow into worldwide fame. But what happens when this image breaks? What happens when it starts to fall apart? Is K-pop moving back away from this image again? As we discussed in the 5th Gen episode, a lot of people have been feeling a shift of some kind in K-pop. Does this hail the start of 5th Gen? No, probably not, but does it hail the start of something new in some form or another? Almost certainly. And although there were several groups leading this change, IVE, New Jeans, Stacey, LE SSERAFIM, Billy, aespa, note, by the way, all girl groups, there was one group that created the biggest splash, one that kickstarted discussions about 5th Gen in one way or another. One show and one group that took over the industry for a few months and has kept everyone addicted. Looking back on it, wondering how we came to this point and just how much this has changed the industry. Or maybe I'm the only one wondering that. ZEROBASEONE are an odd group, and Boys Planet was an odd show. But why? Why them? Why now? What about them specifically makes them unique in the industry and in comparison to other survival show groups? I would argue two things. The uniqueness of the members themselves and how they thus have kind of returned to 2nd Gen in a weird and roundabout way. I talked about their return to 2nd Gen in my 5th Gen video, specifically by how they have been seen to have less boundaries on what they say and how they act. And in this video, I'll discuss the members themselves and the show. How did they come to be in the group and why? What made this show different from Girls Planet and how was it impacted by Girls Planet? And after all of that in different episodes, because I have no desire to repeat the monstrosity of the 8-hour Kepler-OT8 video, I want to look back and rewatch the entirety of Boys Planet, talking about how it was edited in such a wacky, weird way, and analysing how it created a story out of real people. But, as I said, that's for another episode. For now, let's discuss the members and what makes them a part of this wacky group. Also be aware that this video includes the use of queer in a reclaimed sense, and yes, I myself am queer. And an additional warning that although I really wanted to capture some clips from the show to illustrate my points, I can't, since you're unable to capture footage from Viki, the website that hosts Boys Planet. So you'll have to deal with occasional YouTube videos, bad phone pictures, and my extensive descriptions of what happened. Sorry. I do really recommend you watch it on Viki though. The show is hilarious in both good ways and bad ways, and is a very fascinating watch, whether you've seen it 1,000 times or are watching it for the first time. ZEROBASEONE is a project boy group under Wake One and Swing Entertainment companies, created through the Mnet survival show Boys Planet. The show aired from February to April of 2023, and the final lineup of the group was decided solely through fan voting. Well, not really, but we'll get to that when we watch the show. The show divided the contestants, roughly 95 boys, into two groups, Korean and Global, and the final group was announced as follows. Rank 1, G Group Zhanghao, Rank 2, K Group Hanbin, Rank 3, G Group Matthew, Rank 4, G Group Ricky, Rank 5, K Group Gunwook, Rank 6, K Group Taerae, Rank 7, K Group Gyuvin, Rank 8, K Group Jiwoong, and Rank 9, K Group Yujin. The great thing about this group is that most people were pretty happy. Most people could accept this lineup even if their fave hadn't made it in. Some groups that were unhappy were fans of Hui, Jae, and Keita especially, but as I said, most people weren't particularly upset. This partially came from the likability of all of the trainees, the more unified group work of Boys Planet compared to Girls Planet, and the fact that this group had almost none of the issues its predecessor, Kepler, had. If you remember back to my monstrosity of a Kepler episode, some of the main issues with the group were it only had one Chinese trainee, only had 3 global trainees, Zhaoting, who had ranked first, moved all the way to 9th, and that Dion and Bahie had made it in. There was arguably no Bahie or Zhaoting equivalent in Boys Planet, and we circumvented the lack of Chinese trainees with 2, that's double. After the lack of a main vocalist in Kepler, Boys Planet editors and fans also went crazy and made a group with almost no rappers, Gunwook being the only trainee generally accepted as and trained in rap consistently. But even so, he advertised himself as a dancer and vocalist in the past. The only real problem this group still had was that there were very few global trainees. It could be argued that ZEROBASEONE's situation was even worse than Kepler's, since not only did they have 0 Japanese trainees, they also only had 2 foreign members, arguably. Yes, there were 3 G group members, but many people don't count Matthew as a foreign member, as he is ethnically Korean and thus wouldn't have been out of place in K group. Also because, as an ethnically Korean global trainee, he received an advantage over the other global group members as being seen as Korean by voters, who are generally more likely to vote for Koreans. But most people weren't too concerned, since they liked him and his skills, and since our 2 non-Korean global trainees, Ricky and Zhanghao, ranked high in the group, unlike Zhaoting. Additionally, these trainees were all well liked and worked well together, so fans were happy, to the point that it was rumoured that Mnet themselves even came out and said this was basically their ideal group. Other than Ricky, who they clearly didn't like, and Gyuvin, Matthew, and Jiwoong, who they seemed to have mixed feelings on but probably didn't hate, everyone else had been pushed in some way. They were clearly wanted in the group. At the end of the day, the largest change they'd probably make would be Hanbin in rank 1, not Zhanghao, and Park Hanbin or Keita in the group, as opposed to Ricky. But putting all of this aside, the group are weird. And I mean weird. The finale was held live, and afterwards, fan cams upon fan cams emerged of the members doing weird things in the finale. Prime among them, Gyuvin, who got told off for not sitting in his chair properly and went semi-viral for his ridiculous reactions to members being announced. So now, ZEROBASEONE have debuted, and we have a decent amount of content by and about them, so let's take a little hiatus to talk about my experience with the group. I became interested in Boys Planet because I had vaguely followed Girls Planet and wanted to see if Mnet would do any better in the 2nd season of the show. Because we all know from my Kepler video that the 1st season was an absolute dumpster fire. I ended up watching the show, kind of, with a friend, and we had completely opposite reactions. She was expecting to be super invested and continue watching, and I wasn't expecting to be invested at all, considering my relative lack of investment in Girls Planet. But it was the complete opposite. She stopped watching the whole thing and only kept up with news about it, while I got super invested. And that was partially because of these dudes, but mostly because of this guy. That's right, I've mentioned him before, but never actually talked about him much. It's Gunwook. Someone that I have no doubt my brother is sick of hearing about by now. I really liked Gunwook's performance in the 1st episode, and the first top 9 I voted for was Hwanhee, Hui, Keita, Doha, Zhanghao, Matthew, Hanbin, Jiwoong, and Gunwook. I later went back and realised his performance wasn't as good as I had initially thought, but it was still a great effort for a group of young trainees and a hard song as a demo stage. But the fact that Gunwook improved massively throughout the show isn't the point of this section and is something we will discuss later. The point is that I was vaguely interested in this group of 9 people, but over time that well and truly narrowed down to my one pick of Gunwook. See my Kepler OT8 episode if you want to learn about the concept of one picks. It should be in the section about reality show culture. So I went through the show voting for Gunwook and any other random person I liked that week and wanted to keep on the show. I have another friend from fencing who was probably very amused by how invested I became in the show. Episodes came out Thursday nights and we would discuss them on the Friday night for fencing. And let me not tell you about how invested I got, but show you instead. As my friend would probably be able to describe to you, when Gunwook ranked 9th in the second elimination round, keep in mind everyone that you have to be in the top 9 to make it into the group and that these interim rankings are measures of popularity, I was in a great mood for the next few days. And when he came 12th in the third elimination, I was in a really sad mood for way longer than I should have been for a parasocial relationship. It didn't help that he looked kind of crushed too. The show itself doesn't allow screenshots on Viki where it is held, so please accept these trashy phone photos. To Gunwook's credit, he was able to joke around about this, but considering how upbeat he was when ranking 9th and how depressed he was when ranking 12th, I think it's pretty clear he was deeply disappointed with rank 12. Honestly, he even looks kind of like he dissociated so much that he's ascended to another realm. This is how these shows work, as I discussed in episode 3. They get you invested in people, or in caricatures of people, to the point where you will vote for them to get them into the group. The emotions I was feeling, to a certain extent living off of Gunwook's success, or lack thereof, was exactly what the editors wanted me to feel towards my one pick. It got them views, votes, and in the end, it also sold a ZEROBASEONE album fresh off the pre-order production line right into my greedy little hands, where I unfortunately did not get a single Gunwook inclusion. Anyway. So let me tell you that I was very anxious for the last episode of the show. As you can see from prediction videos and from his rank 12 place, many people thought that if Gunwook would get into the group, he would be battling it out for 9th place with others like Kita, Jae, and Jungwoo. I and many of his fans, as can be seen from YouTube comments, were incredibly anxious about his potential spot in the group. We knew he deserved it, but did others deserve it more? Did others have a bigger voting fan base? I didn't want to get any more invested than I already had, so after casting my final live vote, I decided to read a book and wait for the announcement of the top 9. We got an upset right out of the gate. Jiwoong was rank 8, bizarre since he'd been solidly rank 5 or above since the start of the show. This stressed a lot of people out. What would happen to the rankings if someone who had been so stable so far was this disrupted? Anyway, since Gunwook had been predicted to be 9th, if anything, by the community, you can understand hopefully my stress increased immensely when I heard that Jiwoong had dropped so much. And then, I waited and saw Gyuvin as 7th. I wasn't and still am not keen on him as a performer, but he seems like a nice guy and people find him funny, so he's far from the worst person to have in the group. Taerae at 6th? Wonderful. I voted for him until I ran out of spots for non-Gunwook K-Group trainees, which was only after the second elimination. And at that point I was ready to chill until I heard 9th place announced, since Gunwook had a high chance of being announced then. So there I was, reading my book, and I didn't even notice that the next person had been called until I looked up and stared into this face. And instead of showing you my actual coherent thoughts, let me just show you the messages I sent to some Discord friends. Needless to say, I was very happy. Ironically, I seemed to be in a similar daze to Gunwook and didn't even notice Minhyuk asking him a question either. I remember watching it back and going, lol, he asked him something? I don't remember that. Perhaps the age-old saying of fans being like their bias just holds true yet again. At this point, it was very late, around 2 AM where I am in Australia, and I had work the next day. I considered not watching the rest of the episode. I had what I wanted, Gunwook was in the group, But I wanted to see what happened next, so I kept reading and kept watching. I was happy with Ricky in 4th, although he wasn't one of my picks, and was delighted to see Matthew, Hanbin and Zhanghao. I was initially conflicted as to who I wanted first. I thought it would be great for Hanbin to keep his record and be the only person who has ever been first in an entire survival show, but I also wanted Zhanghao to be a foreign rank 1. Either would be great, and in the end Zhanghao won, and I was delighted to see him, perhaps for the first time, realise his actual worth on the show. And then we got Yujin for rank 9. I wasn't super impressed since I had wanted Keita and since Yujin had been relentlessly sexualized by the fans and show alike, but he was still a talented trainee, so I was okay to see him there. I think Keita in 9th and maybe Park Hanbin instead of Gyuvin would have made it a perfect lineup. Not only would Gunwook be the matinee, OMG, I really want that. It also would have added a Japanese member and another global member, and would, most importantly, have made none of the group members minors internationally, although a few of them would still be minors in Korea. I think it would have been a win-win, but in the end, Yujin got in, and if anyone says he didn't deserve this spot in the group, I will come for you. How dare you? Anyway, so I then pre-ordered the album and felt proud of myself for contributing to their record, and I watched a good chunk of their content, and my brother got an incessant stream of Gunwook content. I was so happy for the weeks after the end of the show, because it was so obvious that Gunwook, after ranking 12th in the final elimination, had given up on his chances of being in the group, and for the weeks after, and even sometimes to this day when ZEROBASEONE go to new places and try new things, he seems to be in a state of disbelief that he actually made it in. When I say that this kid could not stop smiling for weeks after he became part of the group, I mean it. He seemed to have been completely high on happiness, and he hasn't even hit the low yet, almost a year after debut. He literally didn't even hit the low when they got their first win as a group. He exudes pure joy at having become an idol, and has taken full advantage of it. He's clearly stored up pickup lines and sexy dances and things, waiting for his possible debut. And when he actually got there, we got an explosion of them, and he looked and sounded genuinely happy to be able to spew all of these cringy pickup lines into the world and still be appreciated because he's debuted now. It was and is hilarious. He's living his YN idol fanfiction life, and it makes me super happy to see. I made my phone wallpaper this blurry-ass image of him with their first win trophy, because I can't help but smile whenever I even think of this picture. He looked so happy with his little trophy, and I think this photo is the epitome of the giant baby idea. Anyway, fun fact that apparently Gunwook likes maths, books, and haiku, and as a maths book haiku lover myself, I am delighted to see that in K-pop. I want to do maths battles with Gunwook. So now that we've talked about my experience with the group, or more so with Gunwook, whoops, I swear I like the other members too. Let's talk about the group members themselves, and what makes each of them a crucial part of the group's unique weirdness. Also, we'll touch on what made each of them actually become part of the group to begin with. Why did these people, of all people, I'm looking at you, Hanbin and Zhanghao, get selected to be part of the first Korean produce boy group since the massive success and failure of X1? But before that, let's touch on why I'm making this video to begin with. Everyone knows that this group is bizarre, so what's even the point of making this video? Well, I do have a few reasons. First, people know this group is weird, but they don't know just how weird they are. And I need to change that. Second, I just generally think they're fascinating and want to talk about them. Third, I wanted to talk about the group to introduce a topic I'd like to talk about in more depth later: the show itself. Boys Planet was a bizarre show and one that created a lot of obsession in its fans, myself included. I frequently rewatch my favourite moments in the show, and I want to talk about what those moments are and how they came about through editing. I also want to talk about the editing in general and how By the way the show was run and edited, it contributed to its perception and final lineup, literally manipulating the fans. But we wouldn't expect anything less from mass media or from an Mnet survival show. But it wasn't really fair to talk about all of that analysis without first reflecting on the sum of its creation, the group. And so I do. Also, I really like this group and its wacky combination of members, and I want to talk about them, so I am my channel, my rules. So without further ado, let's talk about the wacky members of this wacky group, starting with a wacky rank 9 and moving our way up to a wacky rank 1. Yujin, at age 16, is the maknae of the group. He's an interesting case of Mnet's editing. Usually, Mnet likes for the maknae of these produce groups to be about 14 to 16, and Yujin is no different. But he had this odd storyline on the show where the editing painted him as both incredibly talented and not really talented at the same time. He was introduced as a monster maknae but quickly got told off by the mentors for his lack of skills, after they had praised his initial performance. Needless to say, in and of itself, this was a bit bizarre. Over the course of the show, attention was repeatedly brought to Yujin's age. And this wouldn't really be a problem, except that both the show itself and the fans seemed set on sexualizing him. He developed the whole "Nuna salange" phrase, and Lipjae was criticized for saying that she wanted to go out with him during his skit for the Say My Name performance. Not to mention the MC saying that he had drawn the attention of female fans everywhere, and his solo dance at the ZEROBASEONE FanCon where the sexualization continued. But are we really surprised at this point? A member of a group being a minor won't stop the fans or the industry from sexualizing them. And this was the big reason I wasn't keen on Yujin in the group, nor was I keen on Yeso in Kepler, Nikian and Hyphen, and so on. But putting aside the relentless and needless sexualization, let's talk about Yujin's actual story and experience on the show. He's introduced as a strong contender and then instantly shown to not be as talented or as confident as he was initially portrayed. This is, although a bizarre choice, one that makes sense when you think about it. By downplaying his skills, the show lets him show how much he's improved and creates an underdog storyline, thus drawing in fans who want to save and protect him, hence how rabid his fandom can be at times. By playing down his skills and having the mentors insult him, Mnet gave Yujin the best chance they could of debuting in ZEROBASEONE, and their plan succeeded. But the question of whether the debut is good for him or not isn't really my concern. My concern is how he was treated on the show to create and achieve this result. This kid, who was 15 at the start of the show, one of the youngest contestants, was insulted and harassed by judges and fans alike, was criticised and sexualised and generally called out and exposed for a lack of skills. I didn't pay much attention to him on the show, but even I could tell it was getting to him. As his normal fans point out, over the course of the show he started to flinch or show signs of anxiety when the judges talked to him, and he seemed to become less confident in his skills. This was an experience that many people went through on the show. Those that come to mind instantly are Gunwook, Hanbin and Hui. But one thing that these three have that Yujin didn't was experience and age. Gunwook had experience on Wild Idol, Hanbin was an older and more experienced trainee, and Hui had years of idol experience under his belt. This made all three more able to cope with the criticism launched against them, to have a stable reaction and to mostly grow past it. But Yujin was younger, less experienced, and thus more vulnerable. He'd also been given 4 stars at the start of the show and lots of praise, so he had further to fall. I understand that harsh criticism of minors is part of the K-pop industry, but there's a big difference between being a 17-year-old trainee criticised in the privacy of the company studio and being a 15-year-old criticised publicly on the internet in front of millions of people by superstars of the industry. And just because harsh criticism of minors is part of the industry doesn't mean it's a good thing that should continue. Some criticism is definitely needed, but we need to be aware that children are more vulnerable than adults, especially in their mental state. Hence many of the mental health issues that idols have post-debut, especially if they debuted young. The moral of the story is, it would have been the biggest miracle known to man if Yujin made it out of the show without any lasting mental health issues. And the unfortunate chance is that he is very likely to have consistent mental health issues for the rest of his life based on his experience on the show. So why did he make it into the group, and why is he weird? Well, to answer those questions the wrong way around, he isn't that weird in the group. He's a cheeky, skilled, and occasionally anxious maknae. That's pretty normal. The weirdness comes from the lack of pushback I've seen regarding his sexualization. The vast majority of people seem okay with it, or perhaps they're just the vocal minority. Either way, most people seem okay with it, and he seems to have internalized it a little bit, hence the weirdness. This is in stark contrast to people like Nikiev and Hyphen, who has rabid fans sexualizing him and also rabid fans anti-sexualizing him. As far as to why Yujin made it into the group, well, it's obvious. He's a kid, hence younger fans and Mnet themselves like him and want him in. He's Korean, which is always a bonus on these shows, and his underdog story seemed relatable and made people want to help him. Ironically, he never really was an underdog since he had a high rank the entire show and was practically guaranteed to make it in, but the fact that people still thought of him as an underdog and voted for him to help him, despite his maintenance of a high rank, shows the power of Mnet's editing to create this storyline out of thin air for him. His editing on the show was pretty good, showing a strong storyline and growth, and his relationship with the other Yuha members and other trainees seemed good. He also, of course, had some epic performance moments and some comedy moments, little extra sprinkles that made his character on the show more 3D and thus more likeable. And now we've talked about the youngest and possibly most normal member of the group, let's take a complete 180 and talk about the oldest and one of the weirdest members. In my preliminary notes on the group and their weirdness, Jiwoong had the most dot points, and for good reason. This man is the definition of ZEROBASEONE's weirdness. Let's start with his previous debut. Yes, although there are often members of produce groups who have debuted before, it's not often people like Jiwoong who were part of a group, said group disbanded, the member went into a different career and then came back to debut again. It's usually people like Hepler's Yujin or Hui or Sakura, people who have debuted before and are still part of that group, but the group is either doing poorly or they have been sent to gain even more success for said group. And that's not to mention the career he had in between. Jiwoong became a BL or boys love actor. This in and of itself is very unusual, but not particularly weird. The weirdness, and it is very weird, as in I cannot express how weird it is with words, is that Mnet chose to advertise Jiwoong and the show as a whole through his previous experience as a BL actor. On one hand, it may not seem so weird. There's a big overlap between BL and K-pop fans, and BL in K-pop will gain a lot of interest. Hence, it makes sense for Mnet to advertise him and the show through it. You know, gain viewers, gain money. That's not so weird. The weirdness is that this kind of became the style of the whole show, to the point that it was commonly known as Gaze Planet internationally. Even weirder, Mnet didn't give Jiwoong an invisible or evil edit, instead giving him positive edits and generally the kind of storyline that would get him into the group. It's bizarre because we would expect the show to bring attention to his BL career for clout, and then to hide him away, because having a BL actor or anyone heavily associated with any form of queer culture in a group can have a big impact on their reputation in a country as conservative as South Korea. But they continued to show him as a skilled and kind trainee, and showed multiple sides of him. Kindness, sexiness, and so on. He was the sexy man of the show, starting from his BL edit in the first episode right up to his performance of Hot Summer in the final episode. The effect of these edits and the size of his popularity were well known when he barely dropped out of the top 5 throughout the show, and that says something. So Jiwoong kind of became a poster child of the show, especially since he got to do 2 special Mnet Countdown performances, I believe the only trainee on the show who got to do 2, thus becoming the face of those as well. He showed his leadership skills, his sexiness, his vocals, and kind of his rap. And as a member of the group, he becomes a poster child for their weirdness and associations with queer culture, along with the holy duo of Hanbin and Zhanghao. Possibly the weirdest bit about this is the lack of controversy that surrounded him. Keep in mind this script was written before the swearing controversy, which he, I believe, has been proven innocent in. I have no doubt there is some controversy, most of all from his ab reveal in Backdoor, which lots of people didn't like, but that was completely unrelated to his BL past, and more so to the cringiness of the moment. I haven't seen any backlash about a BL actor being in the group, which is odd, because... Is it because the group is so popular? DKZ and Ace got huge backlash for being even remotely involved in BL, but they're smaller groups and they may well have paved the way for Jiwoong to get accepted, in a way. No doubt his previous debut also played a part, as he had already been part of the industry. Anyway, other than his BL past, Jiwoong is surprisingly normal, if that's a label you can assign to a member of this group. Of course, he's a little goofy and he's got the fake Maknae label down, and he's got some hilarious moments like his wrong image moment on Boys Planet. But mostly he's just a regular idol dude. So why is Jiwoong weird? Well, mostly because of how accepted his BL past was. And why did he get into the group? It was a combination of fans of his previous group, fans of his BL, general BL fans, and his good editing and showing his skills on the show itself, as expected. Gyuvin's lack of weirdness comes from his weirdness itself, if that makes any sense. What I mean is that he's weird, right? He's not really known for his skills, but he is known for his visuals and his complete memery, which is what makes him relatively normal, since many idols are known for their memery, Taemin, Jungkook, Lily, Felix, and so on. No, the weirdness comes from his particular brand of memery. Not only was Gyuvin known for making friends with everyone on the show and making funny jokes and faces, and flirting with people in the true spirit of Gaze Planet, but he was also known for the most out there things. And when I say out there, I mean things that I don't think have ever been seen on a survival show before. For instance, bringing a whole suitcase full of snacks to the dorm, literally launching himself out of his seat when other members were announced, and sitting on the floor instead of the actual chair in the finale, to the point where the staff had to halt the show and tell him to literally get his ass off the floor. Let's just say the Boys Planet finale caused a lot of stress for the staff, and Gyuvin was the cause of much of that stress. And that didn't stop when he joined the group. Even before their debut, when asked what made the group 5th Gen, he gave the iconic and very true answer of "because my mum said so." And you know from previous episodes what I think of 5th Gen, but if Gyuvin's mum says 5th Gen has started, 5th Gen has started, people, and you'd better be grateful. However, Gyuvin isn't just a meme machine. He's also shown his kind personality on the show. It seems like everyone loved him, and that is always a good sign. Not to mention his shows of gratefulness to his fans. One fan asked whether he had received a necklace gift she sent, and he instantly pulled it out of his pocket to show her. As the comment said, if that isn't the definition of a sweet idol-fan interaction, I don't know what is. But he's lucky he created this image for himself, because without the fans hyping him up, he may not have made it into the group. You remember how I talked about Bahie getting an invisible edit on Girls Planet? Well, Gyuvin was basically the same on Boys Planet. He didn't feature in the show much, either in a positive or negative way, and thus people like me who weren't really involved in the fandom were a bit confused about how he consistently ranked so high. The obvious next question is, why did they invisible edit him? Bahie's was obvious. They probably didn't want her in the group for whatever reason. Lack of skill, association with her brother, disliking her in some way, or whatever else. But Gyuvin's reasons seemed far more obvious. Many people felt that he wasn't as skilled as other trainees, something I'd probably agree on, and Mnet probably felt the same way. If we look at the finale, it looks like he made life difficult for the staff as well, so that could have contributed. But the probable biggest reason was his company. Mnet seemed, throughout the show, to be scared of having too many Yuha members in the group. There were many Yuha trainees on the show, and they were all pretty popular. But if the group were to be overtaken by Yuha kids, Mnet wouldn't have as much control over it, and a competing company would get tons of money. So Mnet did what they do best, and set their editing team the task of getting rid of a few of those Yuha kids. The four main threats were Gyuvin, Riki, Zhanghao, and Yujin. Yujin they wanted, that much was obvious, as I discussed in the Yujin section of this video. Zhanghao they wanted, but they also probably wouldn't be able to get rid of him either. As a center, he had a huge fan base, and as I'll discuss later, he really was the perfect Chinese member to advertise to Koreans, so they'd eliminate a huge asset if they got rid of him. Hence, Gyuvin and Riki were their targets. Gyuvin got his invisible edit, and Riki, as I'll discuss, got some weird and half-hearted evil edit, which didn't even work anyway. And in the end it all failed, because 4 of the final 9 members are from Yuha, and after the finale, Yuha's stocks went through the roof. Good job, Mnet. So why is Gyuvin weird? Well, his particular brand of memery seems to have caused the staff to lose decades off their lifespans. I think it's mostly that he seems to have absolutely zero brain-to-mouth filter, possibly because his brain is still developing. But some of the stuff he says is just so wacky it makes me do a double take. Like, boogers? Really, dude? Have you ever heard an idol say that? It is actually so bizarre. Anyway, why did he get into the group? Well, because of said memery and because of his visuals, which apparently were massively loved in Korea? I don't know, I personally don't find him handsome at all, but if other people do, I mean, good on them. Now let's talk about someone who was less impacted by weirdness and editing on the show, and more so by the fallout of Girls' Planet. When Girls' Planet ended, the result was a group with no real main vocalist. Chaehyun and Youngin had good vocals, but all of the true main vocal girls on the show had gone home, forcing Youngin and Chaehyun into roles that they probably weren't really ready for. The group was overwhelmed with dancers and rappers, and fans freaked out. When Boys Planet came around, people were determined to vote for a more well-rounded lineup and especially to get themselves a certified main vocalist. And there was one man who stood out ready for the job. That's right, Mr. The Real Taerae, praised by the judges and fans alike for his epic high notes and generally great vocals. He was the target as soon as those eyes locked onto him, and he was practically guaranteed to debut. And that was cemented as his rank rose every week. Taerae also got decent edits from Mnet, but that wasn't really what secured his place in the group. No, that was his virality. Taerae was constantly going viral on the show. First his forehead high note in Backdoor, then his vocal prowess in Man in Love, his cat ears in Switch, and his part in Hot Summer. And every time this happened, his rank increased until he finally made it in at 6th. If there was one good thing that came out of Girls' Planet, it was that Boys' Planet and ZEROBASEONE were so much better. Although that was basically the point of Girls' Planet, so it's what we'd expect. ZEROBASEONE got their main vocalist, and in fact had so much vocal fever that they lacked rappers instead. Why is Taerae weird? Because his place in the group was apart from his skills themselves, almost entirely secured by the fears of the previous season, Girls' Planet, and its finale. Also here is where I give an honourable mention to how sweet he seems, how supportive he is of his fellow trainees and group mates, and how he contributes to the memery, primarily through mothering whenever he can. But we'll get to mother later. Instead, prepare your ears, because we are halfway through this group and you know what comes next. That's right, it's my dude, my bias, the guy who essays have been written about and who will continue to be written about. The idol version of myself, perhaps, the maths nerd himself. Guys, it's Gunwook. He's my bias. This is why he got into the group. I rigged him in, and that is all that matters. Okay, I'm kidding. Grab some popcorn and get ready for this one, people. If you don't know by now that my bias in Zero Base 1 is Gunwook, you have not been paying enough or any attention to this video. So thank you for the watch time, but maybe try and pay attention next time? I think it's pretty obvious, and honestly 99% of me wanting to make this video is just me wanting to talk about Gunwook. Anyway, let's run through Gunwook on the show. Well, first, he showed up on Wild Idol and barely missed out on making it into the group. I didn't watch Wild Idol, but I heard that he had been told he needed to be more confident. So, when Boys Planet comes around, to fans who had supported him before, it was clear that he had taken this advice well. To non-fans, well... Gunwook walked into the first episode of Boys Planet having been part of the teasers for the show online, and dressed in these epic pants which screamed power. The dude beelined for the first place seat, and thank goodness he didn't sit there for long, because the curse of first place definitely would have got him. And then he spent the rest of the episode generally being polite, but super intimidating, powerful, and showing off immense skill and leadership. He was one scary dude, and when I found out how young he was, my jaw was on the floor for the rest of the day. He seemed super mature, experienced, and confident, which made a great first impression for those of us who hadn't seen Wild Idol, and which brought attention to him. Exactly what is needed at the start of one of these shows. In hindsight, this was clearly an act, to at least some extent. Backstage, his kind personality showed through as he encouraged Takuto, and his sense of humour was found with how well he reacted to getting 3 stars instead of 4. He showed respect to his teammates and to the judges, but at the time we were all a little bit shell-shocked, just like Gyuvin, and didn't notice. Or at least, I certainly didn't. So Gunwook got off to a decent start in the show. He had shown skill, confidence, and leadership. He had been praised by the judges and other contestants and had been given a decent chunk of screen time. Most importantly, he had been compared to Dion of Kepler, a popular member of the group and one with a similar performance style to him, who was also from Jellyfish Entertainment. It was clear that Mnet wanted another Jellyfish trainee to debut, and the one they had picked was Gunwook. In the second Signal Song Star mission, Gunwook got even more attention and an even better edit. Not only had he shown clear improvement from the previous round, but it was also clear that the judges really liked him and wanted to see this improvement. They then put him on hold as they wanted to choose his star level later, something that happened to no one else and drew attention to him purely for its uniqueness. And it paid off because he was upgraded to 4 stars, the highest level. Now, if Mnet hadn't made it clear enough, the fans knew that he was a force to be reckoned with. And thus we went into the first mission, at which point we get to the reveal of the true Gunwook, as you might put it. Or should I say, perhaps the crumbling of the facade? Literally. Or perhaps I should even say the start of the Gunwook controversy, even though there wasn't much of one really? Okay, that's a lot, so let me explain for those of you who didn't see the show or who just want to hear me talk more about Gunwook. So because there were unequal numbers of K-group and G-group trainees, one team from the K group would need to go up against a larger group from the G group. This put the K group team at an obvious disadvantage. Each member would have to carry a larger part of the song and a larger load. They would also have to have better individual and group stage presence, since there would be less people to fill the stage. And finally, they would have to perform a girl group song, Blackpink's Kill This Love. Not an easy song, and especially not for a group of dudes to do justice to. It got worse when the G group team was made up of stellar trainees, the Avengers team of G group. It would be almost impossible to beat them. Places filled up, and unsurprisingly, no one wanted to take Kill This Love, for obvious fear of being humiliated and losing to G group. But on the other hand, something surprising happened. No one picked Gunwook. The 4-star trainees had been snatched up pretty quickly for obvious reasons, but for some reason no one had picked Gunwook. Did they not know him well enough? Were they intimidated by him? Did they not think he'd suit their song's concepts? Goodness knows, but no one picked him. The show even pointed out how weird this was, adding, may I say, more screen time to Gunwook's growing massive screen time pile. So the dude does what a dude's gotta do. Calculate. As a maths kid does. Obviously, we don't know exactly what went on inside his head, but we can guess. The guy looks at the surrounding trainees, the least skilled ones, the ones whose confidence has been murdered by getting 1 or 0 stars in the star level test. If they go up against the Avengers G group team, they'll be obliterated. They'll have no chance, and their confidence will take an even bigger blow. There is only one person here who can do justice to Kill This Love, and Gunwook knows it's him himself. He's not narcissistic, just realistic, and he knows that he is the one here with the best performance skills. If nothing else, his 4-star ranking supports that judgment. He is the only one who has a chance against G group, but he can't do a performance by himself. So he picks his jellyfish teammates from the first mission and manipulates Hwanhee, a debuted idol and vocalist, to put together this group. And when I say manipulate, I mean manipulate in the pure sense of the word, but also with the greatest fondness possible. The show even painted it like this. Gunwook was literally the devil on Hwanhee's shoulder, convincing him to put himself in danger to give K-Group the biggest chance possible of winning the Kill This Love matchup, and to give the rest of the remaining K-Group trainees the best chance possible to win their matchup. It was hilarious to watch, even before I thought of Gunwook as my one pick. I'd show you the clip from the show to show you how dramatic it is, but unfortunately I can't. And although this did lead to some people disliking Gunwook as they felt he was cocky and overly confident, most people thought it was hilarious, including, I think, Hwanhee himself. The comedic progression of Hwanhee initially saying, "I wanted to avoid Kill This Love," and then later saying, "Gunwook said something ridiculous," and then picking it anyway is amazing. So, Gunwook had a plan to give K-Group the best possible chance, both by giving Kill This Love G Group the biggest possible rivals, and by giving the leftover trainees an easier song to work with. And did it pay off? Well, I'd say so. The leftover trainees won their battle, and K-Group gave G Group a pretty decent run for their money. Sure, Hwanhee was sick and strained his high note, Gunwook's vocals weren't the best they could be, and the group in general lacked skill and stage presence compared to G Group. But considering what they had to work with, they did an amazing job and still delivered a very good performance. The only reason we look back at it as bad is because G Group were just that good in comparison. In the end, Kill This Love was won by G Group, making them the only G Group team to win a competition that was rigged against them. It was a great moment, and I'm super happy for the G team. However, this was when the facade broke for Gunwook. The dude, running off feedback from Wild Idol, had painted himself as confident, intelligent, strong, and a skilled mastermind. But despite all of his efforts and carrying his team, they lost. And even though I'm sure this is what the editors intended, it definitely broke a lot of people's hearts to see Gunwook so upset over his loss and regretting it. I don't think there was a particular moment he became my one pick. It was more of a slow and steady process. But if there was one, it was probably this episode. The Hwanhee manipulation, the effort and passion to perform, and the breakdown that followed. I want to put a little aside that I think this hardship that Hwanhee and Gunwook went through together, being the most skilled members of their team and then both kind of breaking down, I think that whole process kind of made them very close friends, because when Hwanhee left the show for health reasons, we see him saying goodbye to everyone and Gunwook collapses in tears on his shoulder because he's so sad that he left and he's so happy when he comes back as an MC. So it was just a really interesting moment, and it's interesting that they decided to include yet another moment of this supposedly stoic, tough, muscular dude breaking down because one of the friends he's made on the show has left. So, interesting. But as sad as Gunwook was about Kill This Love, I think he took it pretty well. He got the tears out, was delighted with his 10th place ranking in the first elimination, and went on to the next mission determined to prove himself, with the facade broken and now able to express both the strong and soft sides of his personality freely. And boy, did he make a good choice. Tomboy. I find it fascinating that Gunwook performed Kill This Love and Tomboy, two girl group songs, as his chosen songs during the show. I think it was a great choice, as girl group songs are unique on male survival shows, thus drawing attention to himself. Also, they allowed him to show his performance skills, which is always a plus side on these shows. Tomboy was a great choice for Gunwook as a hard-hitting song with a well-known rap section, and one that suited his previous performances on Boys Planet, concept-wise. It was also great because the team was made up of Hui, Hanbin, and Zhanghao, 3 uber-talented trainees and all in the top 9. As they said to him themselves, this performance, with such great support and a concept that suited him, was bound to bring him up to the top 9. And it did. Tomboy was also amazing for the editors, who wanted Gunwook in the group, let's be clear. It allowed them to continue his hero arc, his rise to the top 9 after the failure of Kill This Love, and it allowed them to do an even more powerful thing: associate him with trainees that people liked. If you don't think that the power of association is important for survival shows, just look at how far Matthew rose in the rankings, simply for his association with Hanbin, a beloved rank 1 trainee. Obviously, Matthew has his own skills and did amazing performances, but his association with Hanbin definitely boosted him. Gunwook in this group was associated with an experienced idol who the fans loved, and both centres of the show, who were also massively liked. Whether or not he actually did well in this performance, by pure association he was almost guaranteed to get to the top 9. Even better, he got this cute little storyline with Zhanghao, one of my favourite things in the show, especially since Zhanghao was my second pick. The two had battled it out in Kill This Love, but now they had to work together, and it was hilarious to see Zhanghao go from being scared of this powerful, aggressive kid to being enamoured by him and his polite cuteness. It was the start of the giant baby Gunwook on the show, a fitting role since he was both the maknae of the group and the tallest, especially towering over Hui. When I say that Tomboy was a miracle for Gunwook and the best chance to show his skills, I mean it. He was pretty likely to debut from the first few episodes. Both his GBTB and Kill This Love performances had been good, but Tomboy was probably what secured it for him. Most of all was the rap he wrote for the performance, which was praised by Bobby of Icon, a well-known rapper in the industry whose word definitely holds a lot of weight here. Even though Hanbin and Zhanghao received a lot more screen time for this mission than Hui and Gunwook, they were both still very appreciated and contributed to the performance. And I love this performance. I go back and watch it often, not because of how good it is, although that is a factor, Not because of the great staging and not because of Zhanghao's epic leather belt chain. No, I watch it again and again because Gunwook just looks like he's having so much fun. He's running around the stage, rapping his heart out, screaming at the camera. It literally looks like this was the best moment of his life. I smile whenever I think about this performance because when Gunwook has fun on stage, his confidence goes through the roof. And Tomboy was a prime example of this. I think one of the reasons this performance was so good was because all of them, and especially Gunwook, seemed to be having a ridiculous amount of fun. They looked like they loved it, and because they loved it, they performed well, and won, rightfully so. Here are some of my favourite Gunwook moments in Tomboy.
That's right, you're tomboy, 이건 통보 빠른 공허인 나 때문에 꼬인 정보 비게 듣기 싫으니 더 이상 콕 넣어 할 말은 많지만 그냥 Too many people and too many problem and too many poppy and too many cute Gonna be a rock star, get on my way, get on my way 이건 나를 위한 pray 3, 2, 1, let's go!
So, after Tomboy, Gunwook achieved his dreams and became rank 9, and he and I both went around for a while with massive smiles on our faces. He went into On Guard team, and as a fencer myself, I was super excited to see how this went. I love On Guard, mostly because of Gunwook, I will admit, but also just because I like the song in general. On Guard was uneventful for the most part. Gunwook got his killing part yet again, and the most I have to say about it, other than that he did a great job and it was great to see his friendships developing, is that the hidden camera prank was also surprisingly great. On one hand, it was a little cruel of the members and show to pretend that Gunwook had lost his killing part, especially so close to the end of the show where stakes are high. On the other hand, this did Gunwook's chances of debuting a lot of good. The prank showed his kind, giant baby side, and also his self-proclaimed high levels of gullibleness, or as he said, stupidity. But far more importantly, it showed that he was a nice and respectful person. It's clear as day looking at him during this prank that he was devastated. Many comments under the video point out that he fiddles, chews on his lip, and raises his eyes in the same way we all do when we're trying not to cry. But despite his devastation and his knowledge that he would be the best killing part for the group, he didn't say anything. He stood there, let his teammates pick another killing part, and respected their decision. And this respectfulness almost certainly made people like him more. The prank may have been upsetting, although it was far from the worst prank in K-pop, but it did wonders for his chance of debuting, and I think he was able to look back at it with laughter, and that's what matters. And after all of that, what happened? Not good stuff. Gunwook dropped to 12th place in the third elimination round, and yeah, he brushed it off with a peace sign and humour, but I think this crushed his dreams at least a little bit. Seen in the final episode of the show. And honestly, it crushed my dreams too. As I mentioned earlier, I went around for days feeling sad. Gunwook and I, and his whole fandom probably, thought that his chances of debut were basically over. And what could he do to increase his chances? He'd already shown everything on the show. Duality, kindness, leadership, dance skills, rapping and songwriting skills, comedy, relatability, and more. The only thing left that he could possibly do was show his vocals. One of the things he had shown well on Wild Idol. And so he did. Jelly Pop Gunwook was a phenomenon, seen by the number of people who posted after the performance saying how this was the performance that made them like him. That this was the performance that convinced them of his skills, and the performance that made them want him in the group and vote for him in the finale. Of course, myself and the rest of his fans were sitting there going, Bruv, this is what we've been saying the whole time. But none of us were going to complain if this brought in more votes for Gunwook. And goodness knows if it did or not, but the fact of the matter is that he made it into the group. And I cannot express properly in words how much this affected him and his fandom. None of us, not Gunwook, not me, nor the rest of his fans, thought he had a real chance of making it in. And then he didn't just make it in, but rose to rank 5. He was KO2 in the end. I think his face when he was called says it all. He wasn't prepared for his name to be called, he didn't have a proper speech prepared since he thought his chances were basically 0, and he even ironically said to Park Hanbin, as Hanbin later recalled, that he thought Hanbin would get in and he wouldn't. This event caused a hilarious high in his fans. Or at least, I think it did. It definitely created a high for Gunwook, and it definitely did for me too. All of us were on cloud 9, elated that he had made it in and that he could finally live out his idol dreams. In the weeks that followed the announcement, Gunwook couldn't seem to wipe this stupid grin off his face. I think he might have gone back to normal a few times and then it would just randomly hit him again. Dang, I'm gonna debut. And then the smile would come back. It was very cute and very hilarious. Anyway, when I say that Gunwook got to live out his idol dreams, I mean it. Like the rest of the members of Zero Base One, Gunwook is an idol fan, and thus he knew what he wanted to do as an idol. And debuting flicked a switch in his brain and he started going crazy. He was spewing pickup lines left and right, doing aegyo, doing sexy dances and dance challenges, making cute little faces at his fans, and just generally wilding around. As a very ace person who hates pickup lines, but also a Gunwook bias zeros who wants him to do whatever he wants, I don't know if I should condone or condemn this behaviour from him. He isn't holding back anymore, he's shamelessly flirting with the fans and you can tell he enjoys it. He clearly stored flirty actions and funny pickup lines for years, and now that he's an idol, he gets to spew them all out into the world without consequence, which is hilarious to me. I love seeing him have fun. So maybe I do condone this, just a little bit. Gunwook in Zero Base One, other than going crazy with the flirting, hasn't been that exciting. The biggest thing for me to point out is that he is a complete nerd, which becomes super apparent if you look back at his school life. The dude started a dance club, got boys interested in dance, was the head of his class, got tons of academic awards, and I recall him saying that he loves maths, which is a message that I, as a maths lover, also want to spread to the world. Gunwook probably stood out to me because, like most of my biases or idols I like, he seems like a much better version of myself. We both like to dance, but he's much better than me. We both were school executive who were focused on getting people involved in new activities. We are both interested in learning other languages, and we are both massive maths nerds. Although I have no clue who is better at maths out of the two of us. So now that I've written over 6 pages on Gunwook, whoops, let's talk about why he got into the group. He got in because he took his feedback and experience from Wild Idol and used it well. He gained confidence and skills and used them. He chose great performances and showed everything he had. He had a strong yet nerdy image and great associations with the other top 9 members. And he is, apparently, massively popular in Japan. Why is he popular in Japan? I don't know for sure, but my money is on the fact that he reminds me massively of the fandom version of Bakugo from My Hero Academia. Harsh on the outside, incredibly smart and skilled, and a softie deep down. He also reminds me of a lot of other shonen protagonists, including in the storyline he got on the show. I might be completely wrong though. He also got great edits and a great storyline from the show, since, well, they wanted him in the group, or at the very least wouldn't have been upset if he'd got in. That much was clear. As far as his weirdness, He isn't that weird as far as this group goes, unless you consider liking maths weird, which a lot of people do. But I think his incredible joy at being in the group and the shameless flirting that followed just makes him a great idol. His weirdness comes from how exaggerated his reactions and story have been, which is why I'm able to so easily compare him to an anime character, because his life and he himself seem so exaggerated. I know I've said it many times now, but it is hilarious. I laugh and smile whenever I think about it. But I've finally run out of Gunwook things to say, for now at least. All I have left before we move on is, Gunwook, challenge me to a maths battle, please. While Gunwook had an amazing story mostly made by the editors, Ricky had an amazing story and character made by himself. I know that the whole young and rich, tall and handsome thing became a meme, but this was a legitimately great marketing strategy. It was catchy and short, became his character on the show, and grabbed attention. This was exactly what he needed. Ricky is a masterclass in how developing one's image on a show like this is crucial to getting into the group. At the start of the show, he uses this silly catchphrase which becomes his character for the beginning of the show. As the show progresses, he shows that he has the skills to back up such a shallow, self-obsessed catchphrase. And when he reaches the debut lineup, he points to the tattoo on his neck and says that yes, he is young and rich and tall and handsome Ricky, but he's also a lot more than that, and as an idol especially and a member of ZEROBASEONE, he will become more than that. I remember one video on YouTube said it very well, but unfortunately I don't remember which one it is, and I watched way too many ZEROBASEONE videos, so I'm very sorry to that person that I can't give them credit. Through developing his image like this, Ricky gained a lot of attention and fans, and then kept them invested. And finally, at the end of the show, he transitioned from just a shallow dude and idol trainee to an actual role model for people, showing that he wasn't so shallow after all, and he well and truly deserved his spot in the debut lineup. Curating his image like this was a top-tier move for Ricky, and he's lucky he prepared this, because it was probably one of the only things protecting him from Mnet's evil editing, which hit him in the second round when he performed Rush Hour. Just like many of the Chinese trainees on Girls' Planet and Boys' Planet alike, Ricky was evil edited, shown to be impatient and demanding and inconsiderate of others. But there was only so much the editing could do against him, and his image persisted, allowing him to debut. The reason I say that Ricky is weird is because he was perfectly able to manipulate the structure of these survival shows. He knew that an image was what he needed to succeed, especially as a Chinese trainee, and he developed the right one for him, one that he could live up to and which allowed him to later send the message that he wasn't as shallow as he'd portrayed himself. He's shown himself to be genuinely funny, caring and three-dimensional, and has only developed throughout the show. He wasn't one of my picks, but I was perfectly happy to have him in the group because he had shown himself through his image. And here is a picture of Ricky looking absolutely divine. So how did he get into the group? The pure strength of his image. Why is he weird? The pure strength of his image. Why do I love him? His image manipulating skills, which I am absolutely in awe of. Good on him. And now, having talked about Ricky and our first G-Group trainee, let's move into the top 3. And another G-Group trainee. Or kind of. Matthew is ethnically Korean, but was put in the G-Group since he grew up in Canada. And I think this, right from the start, was an example of Mnet's manipulation. By making some ethnically Korean trainees part of the G-Group because they grew up overseas, Mnet allows themselves to put less actually global trainees in the group and show, while also promoting more Korean trainees. This means that if the case happens, which it did, aka an ethnically Korean G group trainee gets into the final group, Mnet gets to pat themselves on the back for getting more G group trainees into the final group and thus appeasing international fans, while also not angering any xenophobic Korean audiences by still having Korean trainees in the group. It's a have your cake and eat it too kind of situation. This was especially seen when Matthew had high numbers of votes from Korean fans, who vote largely for Korean trainees. It's very insidious, and the people who lose out because of this are the non-Korean global trainees, and the Korean global trainees like Matthew, whose status as a G group trainee is questioned for this exact reason. Now, I want to say that none of this is anywhere even in the realm of being Matthew's fault, and he 1000% deserves his spot in the group, but it's still a bizarre and weird strategy from Mnet that makes me feel icky. So, Matthew himself. Well, first of all, he's Canadian, so in my eyes, he's instantly 10 times better than an American. Yes, I am biased. Second, he speaks French, which is another instant hell yes on the Will Casper vote for them scale. I've been learning French very badly for many years, so I was hugely interested to see an idol speak French since not many do. Also, he seemed like a sweetie and seemed to like performing, and as a fan of ATEEZ, 17, Dreamcatcher, Gunwook, and the like, I think you can tell that that's the kind of thing I like to see in an idol. Anyway, Matthew. He came on the show with a pretty good chunk of skill. I mean, he got 3 stars and then leveled up to 4 stars later on, so he must have been, at the very least, decent. He got lots of praise and had a great demo stage test. Throughout the show, he showed a desire to improve and to show the best side of himself. But aside from that, he had 2 major things going for him. Well, more like 3 things that are all part of the same thing. Mnet gave him this amazing storyline with Hanbin, the literal centre of the show. Hanbin and Matthew had trained together in Cube, and Mnet had an opportunity to portray them as having a Romeo and Juliet-esque across enemy lines friendly rival thing going on. This would give both of them a sympathetic portrayal, would bring attention and votes to them, and would make it far more likely that Mnet would get these 2 Koreans into their group. This storyline led into the other 2 things. Since Matthew was tied to Hanbin, he now had a need to prove himself as an independent person. This gave him an automatic underdog storyline and thus brought more fans to him, as we discussed in episode 3. Also, and perhaps even more importantly, this evoked something in the fans. Something very specific to Planet 999. That's right, the Urina fears. Throughout the whole show, Matthew was compared by fans to Urina in Season 1, and thus people were scared for him. How did this comparison come about? Well, on Girls' Planet, Urina had been friends with a trainee from another group, in her case, C group, while she was in J group. Not only that, but her friend, Zhao was the centre of the C group. Matthew also had a friend in another group, and said friend was the centre of that group. Why did this cause fear in Matthew and Hanbin stans? Well, because despite having a cute friendship throughout the show, and the fan hopes that they would debut together, this didn't happen for Zhao and Urina. Zhao debuted and gained massive success in Kepler, while Urina was separated from her friend and relegated to a relatively unknown solo career in Japan. Thus, people were scared that Matthew would become the Urina of this season and get left behind while Hanbin debuted. His fans were thus determined to debut him, and this fear and effort came through with him skyrocketing in ranks and finally debuting at rank 3. Interestingly, Keita, being Japanese and popular in international countries but not in Korea, was also compared to Urina, but since he didn't have a friendship storyline that left him behind, this wasn't a very good comparison in my opinion. So these 3 things that were kind of one, the storyline, the Urina fears, and the underdog arc, all came together to help Matthew debut. But unlike Urina, he ended up with an interesting twist to his story. Matthew, despite being Korean and directly connected to Hanbin, was evil edited. During the final mission, when both he and Hanbin were for the first time in the same team for Say My Name, the two had some arguments over leadership. And later on, Matthew expressed his upset that his vocal position had been switched last minute with Seungyeon. This segment generally portrayed Matthew in a poor light. He was seen as demanding, self-centered, inconsiderate, and rude, in contrast to Hanbin, who, as always, was a complete angel. Unsurprisingly, this segment and editing made Matthew's rank drop, from 4th to 9th. But surprisingly, this didn't doom him from becoming part of the group. I'm genuinely kind of surprised how Matthew, somehow, whether it be through the underdog storyline, the enduring connection to Hanbin, or something else, had enough voting power behind him to power through this drop in ranks and this evil editing and still become part of the group. He himself didn't expect it either. Similarly to Gunwook, he had no faith he would get in, and by his own admission was thinking about part-time jobs he should take up after the finale in Canada at the exact point his name was called. It's kind of funny to imagine, honestly. Unfortunately, some of this evil editing has stuck to some extent. Even I myself, despite knowing that it was the editors who made this situation look bad, have some underlying remaining negative feelings towards Matthew. Even though I literally like him, voted for him, and want him in the group? It's telling how powerful the editing is on these shows that even if we know of it consciously, it can still subconsciously influence us. So why is Matthew in the group? Well, because of the storyline, the Urina fears, and his underdog need to prove himself. Why is he a weird one? Well, first of all, not a lot of idols speak French, even a little bit. Not a lot of idols also have this weird storyline either, one that I will get more into later. And even more so, he is weird because, like Ricky, his evil editing didn't force him out of the group. Now, I mentioned that I'd talk about his weird storyline later, and I will definitely talk about it more in depth when I analyse the show itself, but as far as a brief overview, well, when I said I'd talk about it later, I mean I'll talk about it now. If there is one thing that makes ZEROBASEONE both incredibly normal in the industry and incredibly unusual, it is the wealth of gay romance arcs going on in this show. I've already talked about how the advertising of the show, and especially the use of Jiwoong, caused it to be commonly referred to, especially by international fans, as Gays Planet. But the moniker of Gays Planet probably wouldn't have continued as much if it wasn't for the storylines that followed. Let's run through it. Well, first, we have that weird segment with Jiwoong in episode 2 where all the trainees have segments talking about how handsome and sexy he is. And then we have the whole Jongwoo almost kissing him thing. Jongwoo in and of himself is an interesting character who I won't discuss here because he didn't make the final group. Then we have the whole Matthew Hanbin storyline, which of course was read by some people in a romantic gay way. There were also, of course, the people who thought that the whole Here I Am segment with Hanbin and Zhanghao was gay too, but they obviously didn't have much evidence for that, so the Hanbin-Matthew stans reigned supreme. For now. Then something happened. Hanbin and Zhanghao were on the same team for Tomboy, and from that moment on, the Hanbin-Zhanghao soulmate agenda was going strong. I talked earlier about how Gunwook and Hui got almost no screen time in the Tomboy mission, and this wasn't because Mnet dislikes them. Mnet seemed to like, or at least be neutral, to both of them. It was actually just because all the screen time for that mission instead went to the soulmate arc between Hanbin and Zhanghao. They were the perfect power couple. Both were the centres of their groups, both were incredibly skilled all-star trainees, and both were the perfect survival show participants. They were similar ages, both were interested in teaching and had an extensive performance career in the past. Both were respectful to each other, the judges and other participants, worked hard to improve, comforted others, and so on. They both verbalized their appreciation for the other and mentioned just how well they got along. And Hanbin was learning Chinese and doing a good job of it too. So of course people jumped to the conclusion that he was learning just for Zhanghao. Was he learning just for Zhanghao? Maybe, but even if he wasn't, it didn't matter because it was cute as hell. They literally came into one of the eliminations having a conversation where they spoke to each other in the other's language. And if that isn't soulmate material, I, and the Hanbin stans, don't know what is. Tomboy was what sent this unstoppable ball rolling. The fact that Hanbin had been upset, showing his first moments of weakness or self-doubt on the show, and Zhanghao had dropped everything to rush to his side, well, I don't think I need to tell you why that made people go crazy. Even the people who were against romantically shipping them, like myself, thought this was cute. Who cares if they're friends or in a relationship? The specific context doesn't matter. What matters is that they were there to support each other, and that is cute, because I want friends who would do that for me. Then they both completely destroyed Tomboy and battled it out for rank 1 in the following eliminations. From this point onwards, it didn't really matter what happened or which teams they were in. Hanbin was the way to go and Matthew had been shoved to the side. The soulmate agenda continued. They interacted, supported each other, and so on, and the pre-debut content that leaked through in these moments didn't help. Hanbin had been trained in tutting and whacking, 2 dance styles which have some associations with queer culture, and there was of course the whole mother clip, which did nothing to help his case. Zhanghao, as I will discuss, had a minor scandal accusing him of being, I kid you not, heterophobic. So again, this didn't help any arguments that may have been made against him being smitten and incredibly gay. So yeah, that happened. Then there was the finale of the show where they ranked 1st and 2nd, and despite being told by the staff to go up the stairs individually, they stubbornly held hands the whole way. In fact, they held hands all the way through the announcement. The first thing they did when they were announced as rank 1 candidates was to look to each other and hug each other, and there was even a rumour that from some angles it looked like Zhanghao kissed Hanbin's neck? The only thing I have to say to that is, well, he's heterophobic, so who's surprised? There were many comments after the end of the finale saying that the whole show, and the finale itself, had just been Hanbin finding each other as soulmates and getting married while the rest of the group were their groomsmen, and everyone else just looked on. It was hilarious, I have to say. This didn't stop after the group debuted. The two continue to show moments where, whether the context is romantic or friendship, they're still cute. They've shared food, looked after each other, and are often together in pictures, which makes fans go wild each time. Is it a continuation of the storyline which got them so much attention on the show? Most likely, but it's still sweet, and people still like it. You know how the saying goes, it's Hanbin's world and we're all just living in it. Here's another little interlude to say that over the past few weeks/months, a bunch of their group photo cards, like just the Hanbin and Zhanghao ones, have started selling for the price of an entire album or more because they're so in demand. So I think that says something about how popular this relationship is among the fandom. But if we wanted to talk about everything Zhanghao and Hanbin have done that could be considered gay, we'd be here forever. And I'm not even a romantic Hanbin shipper, so maybe I'm not the best person to do it. For the record, I am a massive platonic Hanbin shipper. That is a cute friendship if I ever saw one. I'm just not comfortable shipping real people romantically, no matter how much the evidence stacks up in their favour. Anyway, now we've got one incredibly solid pair in this group. But where does that leave our poor boy Matthew? The dude was kicked out of his own fake love triangle and was now left desolate and alone. Cue the sad music. But you can also cue the happy music, because Matthew had someone, a certain someone called Jiwoong. So then we have the Jiwoong-Matthew pairing, which isn't nearly as strong as the Hanbin one, but which is there nonetheless. Both are Hyungs in the group and have similar attitudes, so they go together well. But what about the other members? Well, nothing too exciting is going on with them, except for Taerae mothering at every possible moment he gets. The most we really get is these kinds of memes which came out of Boys Planet saying that some of them definitely seem not so straight. Commonly mentioned ones are Taerae, Ricky, and Gunwook. I mean, as far as Gunwook and Ricky, they're in a weird position. People seem to think they're either 100% straight or very secretly gay, and there isn't a lot of in between that I've seen. So, with that bizarre love triangle slash love square slash actually there's no triangle or square, it's all just Hanbin, get out of the way, let's talk about our protagonists, Hanbin, starting with, of course, Mr. Mother himself. Hanbin is a weird one. Okay, not really, but at the same time, yes, really. Let's talk about why he got into the group. He had a great image and advertised himself well. He had a great storyline on the show and was portrayed as the perfect person. He was mature, kind, genuinely happy at the success of others, encouraged others and tried to help them be the best, and was humble. He literally said that he didn't think his vocals were up to par and wanted to improve them, and then gave, literally seconds after, an incredibly high-level vocal performance while doing an exhaustive dance and performing solo in the demo stage. I thought he was too good to be true, and then we got to the first mission and he said that he wanted to let someone else do the killing part, and my jaw hit the floor. Who is so selfless on one of these shows that they're happy to stand by and let someone else have the killing part? Holy moly, this man has descended from heaven itself to bless us all with his presence. It was ridiculous. After all of that, he did, well, a lot of the stuff I've mentioned before. He showed a consistent desire to improve himself. He was friendly with all of the trainees, no matter their group or rank. He comforted those both older and younger than him, and he did a great job on every mission, and so on. When he was announced as rank 2, he instantly congratulated Zhanghao and gave a picture-perfect speech. And when he was asked later about said picture-perfect speech, he gave a picture-perfect answer. In the ZEROBASEONE commentary on the show, they literally joked that he was a robot because all of his answers were as perfect as they can get, and he doesn't even seem to be able to stop himself. Now, is Hanbin too good to be true? Well, maybe and maybe not. It's highly likely that a good chunk of what he's shown, leadership skills, performance skills, friendships with other trainees, and genuine love for performance and his fans, is real. But other things like his personality itself are probably real but exaggerated for the stage. Chances are that he actually is humble, kind, respectful, and hardworking, but these traits have been amped up to the next level by either himself, the showrunners and editors, or both. If one trains enough, it can be pretty easy to give picture-perfect answers to things, and I speak from experience. So that is also something to be expected from someone who controls their image so well. As much as he is definitely putting on an act for the camera, I mean, every idol is, he is probably also genuinely a nice, fun, and easygoing guy, which is what got him to this position in the first place. Hanbin showed literally everything on Boys Planet. Skills, connections, leadership qualities, a desire to grow, a great personality, a few flaws allowed to peek through to round him out, friendships with the other trainees, funny reactions to things, and a love for performing. This was what allowed him to debut. It's almost impossible to express in words how perfect Hanbin was on the show. And you can see from how long I've ranted about him already that it would take a ridiculously long amount of time to explain too. So I've resorted to referring to him as the perfect survival show participant, TM, because that's what he is. His image and story were perfect for a survival show, and that continues into the group. He's like my one friend who, weirdly, inexplicably, despite having no psychological training and with very little experience, manages to say the exact perfect thing in every situation, from a psychological perspective, that is. It's like he holds a store of psychologically perfect responses and has no judgment of any sort towards himself or others. The level of perfection in these responses is both insane and kind of creepy, and it's all subconscious. And that's what Hanbin is like. It's actually hilarious that neither Hanbin nor my friend have any idea how perfect their responses are until it's pointed out to them. It's completely genuine. That said, when I look at the actual show, we will see plenty of subtleties that make Hanbin actually perfect. Hanbin had another thing going for him: publicity. For the duration of the show, he racked up rank 1 after rank 1. He quickly gained the longest rank 1 record in produce history, and although he fell to rank 2 in the finale, he maintains this longer streak. In Produce 101, Sejong, the queen herself, who eventually ranked 2nd, had the highest average rank in a produce season, 1.625, having ranked in the top 2 throughout the whole show. This was a ridiculous achievement, and people assumed it would be impossible to beat, up until Hanbin smashed her record on Boys Planet. Sure, Boys Planet is technically different from Produce, but they're basically the same show, run in the same way with the same gimmicks and things, and run by the same company, so I think it's safe to lump them together. Hanbin ranked 1st the entire show until he ranked 2nd in the finale, with an average rank of 1.2, compared to Sejong's 1.625. And it's pretty easy, considering I've talked about how perfect he is, to see how he managed to do it. Mind you, at the same time, despite all of that, it's kind of crazy that he actually did manage to do it. So we've talked about how he got into the group. Let's touch on how he adds weirdness to the group. Well, I already talked about the storylines with Matthew and Zhanghao, and I talked about his unique dance background with associations with queer culture. I also mentioned the whole mother thing, and Hanbin's list of hilarious pre-debut videos continues to grow to this day. But honestly, most of the weirdness comes from what I've discussed: his perfect image. I can't see anything tarnishing this guy's image in the near future because it's so strong. It's a choose situation. If Hanbin gets accused of literally anything, the industry and the fans will fight back, for sure. He is literally the perfect trainee and the perfect survival show participant. Maybe he's just a psychology student and has just learnt the right things, psychologically to say, but maybe he's also just perfect. But, speaking of people being perfect, someone else was also perfect on this show. Someone else also showed everything they had on the show, and someone else also produced a rock-solid image which will probably remain until the end of time. Unfortunately, for my bias, it isn't Gunwook, who only just missed out on having the perfect image on the show, but who did show every part of himself. It wasn't my bias who was perfect on the show, unfortunately. No, it was my second bias, my second favourite member, my two-pick, if you will. You know him, you love him, or at least I hope you do, because otherwise his fans, including me, will come for you with vengeance. It's... That's right, it's Zhanghao. And just as I refer to Hanbin as the perfect survival show contestant, I refer to Zhanghao as the perfect Chinese survival show contestant. He couldn't be a perfect survival show contestant because he's Chinese and these shows are riddled with xenophobia, especially the xenophobic Chinese demonizing kind. But although his ethnicity automatically meant he couldn't be perfect in the eyes of Koreans on this Korean survival show, Zhanghao still did what he could and became the perfect Chinese contestant. Let me explain. Zhanghao had everything that Hanbin had. A great personality, great skills, was more mature, had leadership skills, was kind and humble and got along with other trainees, and so on. He also showed everything he had on the show. His violin skills, his intelligence, his great personality, his skills in dance, vocal, rap, leadership, comedy, and so on. He also had the benefit of a massive Chinese fan base and the pre-debut rumours of being gay and in a gay relationship, and also reportedly heterophobic, both of which had queer people from around the world flocking to him and voting for him to support someone who was supposedly outwardly heterophobic, which I think is hilarious. There was also, of course, his amazing skills, his epic performance in Jelly Pop, and his relationship with Hanbin, but Zhanghao had one more thing going for him. If Hanbin had a great story, Zhanghao had a stellar one, an 11 out of 10 storyline, a literal survival show winning storyline. He was introduced as a skilled trainee, the eldest of the G Group Yuha trainees and thus a role model. He had great reactions throughout the show, was humble and kind, and was instantly established as being a genuine and talented contestant. He was already the center of G Group and was practically guaranteed a spot in the group by this alone, especially after his brilliant vocal performance for Kill This Love. But if there was any doubt that Zhanghao would debut, any at all, that doubt was destroyed when it came to Tomboy. And no, not because of the whole Hanbin thing, although that was super important. No, it was because of what Zhanghao himself did. During the Tomboy mission, Zhanghao first had that brilliant storyline with Gunwook that I will continue to bring up because I love them both and love that moment, but he also expressed his desire to have a killing part. He hadn't had one before, as Hanbin had been given the part for Here I Am, and Keita had done the killing part for Kill This Love. Unfortunately, he was in a group with the literal only person who could beat him, Hanbin, and Hanbin, of course, got the killing part. But this was when the Zhanghao storyline went through the roof, because instead of showing resentment, he showed happiness for Hanbin, a little sadness for himself, of course, and instantly switched to delight at being able to do Yuchi's part, a member of Idol who, as Hao pointed out himself, is also Chinese. So not only did he show resilience and love and respect for the group he was covering, his seniors very important in K-pop, he also showed appreciation for Yuchi's heritage, a great move, especially for those of us in the audience who are Neverlands. But he took it one step further. He said that since he is singing a song in Korean on a Korean show, it's only fair he respects the language and does his best to pronounce it like a native speaker. And this was the moment his debut was secured, 1000%. This was the moment that Zhanghao went from being the foreign center to the perfect Chinese trainee. I think it's insane how much people overlook this moment, like this was a career-securing statement to make. If there is one thing that these shows and the Korean audiences of these shows hate, it seems to be when foreign trainees don't follow or appreciate Korean rules and conventions. And Zhanghao practically bowed down before them and gave the Korean language priority. Could you argue that this could be seen as him disregarding his Chinese heritage? I mean, I guess, but I think it's pretty clear that he loves his culture and homeland. He just also knows when he needs to show an appreciation to other cultures and languages. Zhanghao got Hanbin to teach him the Korean pronunciation, another moment which showed his sincerity, and which led to the mentors literally asking if they could take away his passport and keep him in Korea forever. If that doesn't show how he was the perfect Chinese trainee to Korean audiences, I don't know what will. Anyway, this continued as Zhanghao got first place in the Tomboy performance and continued on to get 2 killing parts. He continued to show his appreciation for others, and especially Hanbin, by getting Hanbin to teach Over Me team some tutting and whacking techniques to use in the dance break, a decision which I think was brilliant. And then, of course, the two battled it out as the respective centres of the final stages, Jelly Pop and Hot Summer. Did it matter that Matthew was better suited to be centre of Jelly Pop? I mean, kind of, but that fact didn't stop Zhanghao from absolutely killing it. They had their bridge in Here I Am, were announced as rank 1 candidates, Zhanghao may or may not have kissed Hanbin, and so on. Now, if Zhanghao, being the perfect Chinese trainee, couldn't get any better, he had one last trick up his sleeve. A huge international fan base, and a not-so-shabby Korean one either, propelling him up the final little bit he needed to rank 1 in the finale. And just as it's hard to express how perfect Hanbin and Zhanghao were on the show, it's hard to express the massive impact that Zhanghao winning first place had. First, it toppled Hanbin's longest rank 1 streak in history and proved that the undefeatable man was in fact defeatable. Second, it was most certainly one of the factors leading to Yuha's massive overnight rise in stocks after the finale. But third and most importantly, Zhanghao became the first foreign trainee to win a produce series survival show. Something that couldn't even be done by the most popular of trainees like Sakura. This also made him the first Chinese trainee to win a produce season, which, considering how Chinese trainees have been treated historically on the show, said a lot. I vaguely followed the live Reddit thread for the finale, and let me tell you, it was hilarious when Zhanghao was announced rank 1, telling him to literally never stop talking in his acceptance speech, and both laughing and crying at how Mnet had been screwed over in their efforts, both by having 4 Yuha trainees in the group, and by now having a foreign center, not the Hanbin they had wished for. But to be fair, Zhanghao was probably their second choice for center, so at least they didn't have to worry too much about that. Putting aside the amazing personal achievement that was Zhanghao winning first place, and the many massive personal achievements he's had since, it also has a massive impact on the industry, as Chen Kondri's visceral reaction to the announcement shows. Zhanghao is now a role model for every foreign and especially every Chinese trainee who wants to become an idol, or who goes on a survival show. He will, for the rest of history, be the first foreign person to win a produce season. The impact that this will have on the hopes and dreams of young children, and especially Chinese children, is massive. He has set a new precedent in the produce world, and no one can ever take that amazing achievement away from him. Also, let's have a brief aside to mention how much I love his outfits throughout the show. As someone pointed out, he was always dressed in outfits with uneven sleeves, which I love. I also love this leather chain thing he had in Tomboy. Please, I want one of these. Why can't I find them online? These outfits all looked so good on him, especially the uneven sleeves. My favourites are Tomboy and Jelly Pop. Anyway, Zhanghao's uneven sleeves need appreciation, especially since it ties him to the very queer Chinese cut sleeve legend. Another connection to queer culture for the ZEROBASEONE members. The sleeves are both a great aesthetic calling card, and obviously they relate him to the cut sleeve legend. He's also said himself that he has a habit of rolling up one of his sleeves when he plays violin, so it yet again ties him to his musical past and shows his skills. It's like the perfect visual calling card. So, why did Zhanghao get into the group? Well, because he was the perfect Chinese contestant who had an amazing storyline and developed great relationships with many people throughout the show. The simple fact that he didn't believe he got first place until it finally hit him when he sat on that chair and broke down says something amazing about him. As comments say, and will continue to say under his content, he showed everything and he got what he deserved. He was able to use his past skills as a teacher, a musician, and even just an older, more mature and experienced person to prove himself on the show and win. And although I have no doubt that some Hanbin stans were toxic, xenophobic, and salty, almost no one was upset to have him in the group and to have him as the group's center. When I say that he is the perfect Chinese survival show participant, I mean it. Why is he weird in this group? Well, first of all, he's a foreign and Chinese center. He's one of a kind, that is literally weird. He's also had his whole heterophobic scandal and the whole Hanbin thing. And of course, he is the perfect Chinese participant. He's also, like the rest of the group, just a tad unhinged. There's many reasons I love him so much, but his easygoing personality, intelligence, performance skills, kindness, and desire to improve shine through. He's such a fun person to watch on stage and in general, and I'm not going to lie, he and Gunwook did get to me a little bit in a parasocial relationship way, where I almost started thinking of them as friends in a way that hasn't happened to me since I first got into BTS. And you've got to be powerful to do that to me who is such a skeptical psychology student. Maybe it's because I see them as better versions of myself and feel that being friends with them would make me a better person? Anyway, so the moral of the story is that I really like Zhanghao, or as I have got into the habit of calling him, heterophobic Hal. And with that, we've discussed all the members of the group, why they're in the group, how their stories developed on the show, and what makes them just a little bit, or in the case of a few, a lot bit, weird in the group and the idol industry. So let's take a moment to look at some other unusual things about the group as a whole. But ZEROBASEONE won't just let the members and the group be the only odd thing about them. So let's discuss some other things related to them, the fandom, and the industry as a whole. First, they are one of the first major survival show groups in a long time. Most survival shows start with an experimental female first season, other than Island, which was an oddity. This means that most of them which stop after one season have only female groups, not male ones. Additionally, after the fall of the Produce series, a lot of companies probably wanted to get in on the newly available niche, so started planning programs. By the time these programs started getting up and running, Produce was back as Girls Planet, and ZEROBASEONE in the second season debuted in a landscape full of powerful girl groups and powerful female survival show groups and participants re-debuting. The simple fact that they were a boy group at a time when girl groups were mostly popular was a bit odd. Also, the last real Produce boy group to debut had been 101 in 2017, as X1 hadn't survived past their first few weeks as a result of the rigging scandal. So yeah, people were excited for Bepler, or ZEROBASEONE, and their success was both expected and a little bit odd in the currently girl group dominated market. So that's their weirdness in the industry. That and the idea that they were the start of 5th gen, something I don't agree with, but which we have already discussed and which is generally accepted. We discussed that in episode 4 if you're interested in looking at that. Now let's talk about the group and their fandom, some sweet little quirks they have. Well, first of all, K-pop itself has a very large queer fan base, but I think ZEROBASEONE has a particularly large one. Members like Hanbin, Taerae, Gunwook, Zhanghao, and Ricky seem to attract them. I'm not sure how, but maybe just their personalities, the way they hold themselves. Anyway, as I'm sure you could guess, the big players are Jiwoong and Zhanghao. Jiwoong, since he's been in BLs, thus will naturally attract both queer and straight female fans. Or both. You can be both. Zhanghao needs no explanation. He is heterophobic, and that is all a queer audience needs to know. And I'm not saying people are shallow, because I speak for myself too. Obviously there are other reasons I personally like him, but I and a lot of other people saw heterophobic and were instantly very invested. Speaking of the members, it's interesting that Hanbin, the leader of the group, is often referred to as the mother. In K-pop boy groups, we often end up with the pairing of the leader and the eldest member, as they both have larger responsibilities and are seen as the parents of the group. RM and Jin, Hongjin and Songhwa, Yeonjin and Subin, and so on. If the eldest is also the leader, like S-Coups, we move down the line, hence S-Coups and Jonghan. In these pairings, the leader is usually referred to as the dad of the group and the eldest as the mum. as the leader is usually given a more masculine role of leadership, and for some reason the eldest always seems to have a more feminine presenting concept. Obviously, this gets into a lot of issues. Shipping culture, forcing heteronormativity on same-sex couples, etc. But those topics aren't for this video, so I'll just acknowledge them. The odd thing about Zero Base One is that not only do we not have the expected Hanbin Jiwoong pairing, instead a Hanbin Zhanghao pairing, but also that if opposite sex roles are given to them, it's always Hanbin as the mother, not Zhanghao as we would expect. Firstly, I rarely see them referred to in heteronormative ways, which unfortunately is probably less of K-pop fans becoming self-aware, understanding, and progressive, and more about just how the group and survival show were structured. Anyway, Hanbin is referred to as the mother. Why? Because of the meme, and that is literally it. But it's still interesting. We then have the lineup itself. The lineup is odd as there are almost no rappers. Gunwook is the only real one, and even then, as I said earlier, he promoted himself on his 2 survival shows as a dancer and singer, and an all-rounder, rather than purely a rapper. The lineup is somewhat hilariously also influenced by Girls Planet. I have no clue whether Produce series also influenced each other, but the Zero Base One lineup is almost complementary to the Kepler one in that every single problem that came out of Girls Planet was fixed in them, but they kind of ended up with opposite problems. If we remember back to episode 3, 5 of the problems people had with Kepler were that there were few Chinese trainees, few global trainees in general, few vocalists, Zhao Ting, a Chinese member, ranked last in the group when she had been very popular, and that Bahie and Dion made it in. Well, Zero Base One solved almost all of these. There were more Chinese trainees, 2 instead of 1. There were more vocalists, to the point that they lacked rappers. The Chinese and global members ranked high, and we even ended up with a Chinese center. And of course, Bahie and Dion weren't on Boys Planet anyway. So the only problem we didn't fix was having more global trainees, which is to be expected. Interestingly, if we put together Kepler and Boys Planet as a massive 18-member group, they'd probably have like a very well-rounded lineup and would become a supergroup. Other concerns were those around Urina not making it into the group. Specific trainees who were influenced by the aforementioned fears from Girls Planet were Keita, Taerae, Hanbin, Zhanghao, Ricky, and Matthew. Of these trainees, 5 out of 6 of them made it into the final lineup. Hanbin and Zhanghao proved their vocals, hence people wanted to vote for them. Ricky and Zhanghao had the fears of Chinese contestants ranking low behind them, hence they got more votes. Taerae was literally advertised as an amazing vocalist by the show for this exact reason. They clearly wanted him as the main vocalist of the group. He was even singled out by the judges. And Keita and Matthew had the Urina not making it into the group fears. Matthew since he was friends with Hanbin, and Keita since he was Japanese. This meant that Zero Base One ended up with some opposite problems from Kepler. They didn't have any particular Mnet favourites who would get all the lines. They didn't have anyone who could generally be considered a dozen. They had amazing vocals, and they also had amazing dance skills and were generally talented. However, they didn't have rappers, they didn't have any Japanese members, and they ended up with a few more vocalists and dancers than they realistically needed to be balanced. Despite these issues though, they are of course much better off than Kepler. I just find it hilarious to think that if it wasn't for Kepler being the way they are, we probably wouldn't have got Matthew, Taerae, and maybe even Ricky into the group. And we almost certainly wouldn't have got Zhanghao as our center either. Crazy. Similarly, we have the whole weirdness of their fandoms. Most survival show groups come out of the show with a decent amount of controversy and fan wars surrounding them. The fan bases which were warring have to combine, members who were competing have to work together, and the fans of people who didn't make the group are upset. But although Zero Base One certainly had some of these, namely people who didn't want Gyuvin, Yujin, or Gunwook and did want Keita or Jay, it was to a far lesser extent and died down pretty quickly, within a few days. I think the reason for this is that although, yes, I think that adding Keita and Jae instead of Yujin and Gyuvin would have made a stronger lineup, Gyuvin and Yujin still contribute to the group and are still talented. Additionally, the nature of the show and the relationships between the contestants meant that the fandoms didn't really have anything legitimate to fight over. Since everyone was relatively chill to begin with, at least on my side of the internet, and the group was about as good as it was going to get, we all knew that, even those who weren't 100% on board were still relatively satisfied. There's a reason a lot of people said that even though some of their faves didn't make it, they'd still stan the group, and it was rumoured that Mnet said that this was basically their ideal lineup, because this was a great lineup and they have continued to show that through their work. After their first few activities, no one could realistically complain. Thus, somewhat unusually, the toxicity just died. Unlike Kepler, who have many a fan war to this day. Then we also have the proclaimed nature of the group as the start of 5th gen, and of course the poetic nature of the Jiwoong, Matthew, Hanbin, Zhanghao arc that I talked about in section 11 of this video. Just worth mentioning. Finally, I want to come back to the fact that we have a heterophobic Chinese older than 21 center. That is insane, and I still can't believe it to this day. It is literally impossible to describe how weird that is. It's good weird for sure, but it's still weird. Some other honourable mentions are them doing weird things like dabbing still, even though that was a trend something like 6 years ago. As we would expect from everything I've said above and from the dabbing, they are also literally unhinged. I'll just put in this video the compilation of them being unhinged during the finale, which went, I don't know, semi-viral in the K-pop community? Let's just say this is about as wacky as it gets. So now that we've established that this group is weird as hell, let's talk about some common trends in their weirdness. So let's quickly go over a few. First, this group is, whether ironically or unironically, gay as can be. Heterophobic, BL actor, love squares, gays planet? I'll leave it there. Whether it's for marketing purposes or not is a completely different question. They are also, on average, a bit older than I expected and older than a lot of groups these shows usually end up with. At debut, 5 of the 9 members were over 20, 4 were over 21, and 8 out of 9 were over 18, the generally accepted international age of majority. Compare this to IZ*ONE, who at debut had only 2 members over the age of 20 and only 1 over the age of 20. This is obviously a massive difference in age, even accounting for the fact that IZ*ONE were a girl group with more members. Just a little interlude. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure why I compared them to IZ*ONE instead of Kepler. Perhaps because they have a similar concept to IZ*ONE and are managed well the same way IZ*ONE were. That said though, I'm pretty sure compared to Kepler, they would still be older because when Kepler debuted, Yeso was underage, Bahie was underage, Youngin was underage. I'm pretty sure Dion was as well, and I'm sure there were more. And I believe Yujin and Xiaoting may have been the only ones over 20 or 21. So ZEROBASEONE are definitely older than Kepler on average anyway. Next is the obvious fears from Girls' Planet. Several fears came out of Girls' Planet, that there would be a lack of global trainees, a lack of Chinese trainees, and a lack of vocalists. Hence, people were more likely to vote for vocalists, G-group trainees, and Chinese trainees. Fun fact, Zhanghao is all 3. The fact that many global votes had been split between multiple global trainees on Girls' Planet, leading to them having a lower 1 pick and thus not making it in, meant that Boys' Planet viewers were more likely to vote only for a single global trainee and not split their votes. This explains how Ricky, Matthew, and Zhanghao ended up so high in the votes. Their fan bases were petrified that they wouldn't make it in, so they didn't vote for anyone else. Hence why trainees like Keita and Jae didn't make it, and those like Jiwoong and Yujin were lower on the list when they had previously been higher up, as they had a lot of filler votes. The fears of lacking main vocalists also led to people voting for trainees like Hanbin, Zhanghao, and especially Taerae, who have proven themselves as having vocal skill. Hence, Taerae made it in and was ranked quite high. So, as I've said many times before, it's kind of hilarious how the fears from Girls Planet created a better group, but one with the opposite problems. No Japanese members and too many vocalists versus too few rappers. That said though, I believe they do have some quite popular in Japan trainees, like Gunwook's quite popular in Japan. I think Hanbin and Zhanghao might be as well. So let's just say they're not losing out. There was also the urine fears, which led to Matthew ranking high by his association with Hanbin, and the fears of potential dozens, hence why Doa, Takuto, and so on got eliminated early with relatively little fuss, and why super talented trainees like Jae, Hanbin, Gunwook, and Park Hanbin got way more votes. Another thing that all of the members had in common was a very strong story and personality, either created by themselves or by Mnet. They all seemed to understand that they were on a show, where they needed to stand out in some way to get votes and attract an audience. They used this to their advantage, and many of them were also aided by the show itself in creating this story. Since a storyline is one thing that really helps you get a place in the group. Let's take a look. We've got Yujin, whose story was created by the show as a young prodigy who then cracked a little under the pressure, but came back better than ever despite his anxiety. Jiwoong, with a story created both by the show and himself as a tragic victim of Nugudom, loved by all of the trainees for his sexiness, working on becoming a better leader and showing his performance skills and passion. Gyuvin, whose story, or more like notable personality, was created almost entirely by himself as he made friends with every person under the sun and showed his goofiness and care for others. Taerae, whose story was made and engineered by the show and the fans as an amazing vocalist worthy of debut. As soon as the mentors said he was a 4-star vocalist, the ears of Girls Planet viewers perked up and he was guaranteed to debut from that point onwards. Gunwook had a story created by his own growth from Wild Idol and Boys Planet, a kid who had come back more confident in the shadow of Dion from Kepler, also from his agency, only for the confidence to be a facade, only to show his sweetness and passion, grow and improve, and prove himself as an all-rounder. Ricky, whose story was made by him himself, as a literal perfect idol, just to show that he was also human, and then to say that he wants to be more than an idol, more than his viral catchphrase, and to become a worthy role model. Interestingly, the show tried to sabotage his own story through evil editing, but Ricky had picked such a good advertisement for himself that it was literally too strong for Mnet to get through. Similarly, Matthew also had an attempted takedown by Mnet, only this backfired as they had created such a powerful story for him with Hanbin. Hence, it didn't work, and the end of his story was finding himself as an individual, not as Hanbin 2.0. Hanbin himself had both his amazing personality and his amazing story from Mnet, with his pseudo-love triangle, amazing skills, pitch-perfect personality, friendships with all the trainees, leadership skills, and so on. The story he created for himself aligned with the one Mnet gave him, which is what let him become so powerful. And of course, our boy Zhanghao, whose story as a center was just as good as Hanbin's, mirroring Hanbin's while also showing him as a separate person. Super skilled, kind and helpful, humble, and so on. Zhanghao also played a part in making his own story through his actions. His desire to speak perfect Korean, his wish to get a killing part, his storylines with Jiwoong, Gunwook, and Hanbin, and so on. All of these boys either knew how to manipulate the show and system into showing the best sides of themselves, or were manipulated by the show's own storytelling to gain attention and thus votes. All of them had some level of uniqueness on the show and either had a highlighted storyline or personality. The notable people, although I think all of them are notable in their own way, are Taerae, whose story was entirely constructed by the show, Rookie, whose story was entirely constructed by himself, Hanbin and Zhanghao, whose personalities and storylines on the show were perfectly harmonized to their pre-debut lives, and Gyuvin, who wasn't given a storyline at all, but was simply given a stellar personality, half by his own efforts and half by the show's goofy editing. Interestingly, in this group we get people like Gyuvin, who got very little screen time, and we get Ricky and Matthew, both of whom had an evil edit. This is surprising because most of the time those who are given evil edits on shows, Christian, Kaibing, Yanning, etc., by the way, note they're all Chinese, don't make it into the final group. But here 2 of them did, and this is because, as I said before, they had amazing storylines and a strong enough image that the editing wasn't believed. For instance, when Ricky was evil edited in the dual position mission, his fans saw it as his words being taken out of context and an attempt to overthrow him as a Yuha trainee. While, when Matthew was evil edited in Say My Name, fans pointed to the heightened stress of the situation and other trainees' bad handling of situations as well. Pointing out how everyone was stressed, Matthew had simply handled it worse than others, and Mnet had taken the worst things he had said to make him look bad. These things are obvious, but a lot of the time people who watch these shows do so uncritically, so for there to be so much critical thinking on Boys Planet is actually quite a big shock. Last, I want to mention that they are all fans of idols, and thus they know what they want from their idols and what fans want from idols. We see this in several key interactions, Hanbin being the perfect idol, Gyuvin making exaggerated goofy facial expressions, Zhanghao posing for the fans at fan signs, and Gunwook spouting pickup lines like crazy as soon as he made it into the group. Seriously, if there are 2 people in this group who know what they want from idolhood, it is Gunwook and Zhanghao. Both of them had this switch flipped as soon as their names were called and started spewing idol stereotypes out into the world. Gunwook, as I've discussed before, clearly had been developing a bank of pickup lines for years before his debut, which, in and of itself, I think is hilarious and cute. And Zhanghao was ready to give fan sites the best photos possible, and of course to forgo all media training and say the weirdest things he could. I loved both of them before they were picked, but it makes me so happy to see them looking so happy to be able to have fun interactions with their fans. I think it gives an insight into their personalities and psychology, and shows their genuine passion for the role. I mean, no one who's only in it for work experience would do that much research on being an idol. So, to sum up, each of the members of this group were either great at advertising themselves, or were advertised well by Mnet. They all created great personalities and characters, thus people liked them and voted for them. Many of them were also boosted by fears from Girls Planet and their amazing storylines, which they were either given or manipulated the show into giving them. Many of them are also fans of idols, and thus know exactly what they want as fans. I say what they want as fans, not what the fans want, because not all fans are like that. Gunwook may want to have pickup line battles with his fans, but I certainly do not want to have him spout pickup lines at me. No sir, please keep those to yourself when I'm around, as my ace self can't handle it. Anyway, as long as he's having fun, I guess. So now that we've talked about their individual and group weirdness, let's talk about their actual debut. Will it have an impact on the industry? Has it already? What are the implications for future produce? Planet 999 seasons. ZEROBASEONE debuted in July 2023, heralding the culturally accepted start of the 5th generation. But that's not the only way they've made their mark on K-pop. Their debut, In Bloom, was a return to a refreshing flower boy concept, more reminiscent of 3rd gen than the industry is now. Many 4th gen groups are firmly cemented in noise music and bad boy concepts, so this debut was a literal breath of fresh air for the industry. Their debut surpassed all expectations, for most people at least, and continued their great storyline as individuals and as a group, as they came together to create funny reality shows, amazing performances, and showed that they could do a great job at executing a wide range of concepts. So, what is their impact on the industry? Well, first of all, after their record-breaking debut success, it's likely that we will, again, see more boy groups debuting and in the limelight. Girl groups dominated the second half of 4th Gen, so it makes sense that the start of 5th Gen, heralded by ZEROBASEONE, will see a rise in popular boy groups, and so, the circle of K-pop life continues. These boy groups will also likely have a more fresh and light concept than the dark and edgy concepts that have become so common nowadays. Also, they're a boy group in the middle of an influx of girl groups, making them stand out even more. But even more so than for the industry, they have massive implications for Kep1er and the future of Planet 999 as a franchise. First, ZEROBASEONE, or more so Wake1, their company, received a lot of criticism when they debuted, since they received far better treatment than their sister group, Kep1er. They have a bigger budget, better gifts, better cakes, their own birthday photo shoots, and so on. They also didn't seem to be recycling outfits like Kep1er did. Let's just say fans were not impressed. Wake1 have always treated Kep1er pretty terribly, and this easy contrast with a successful debut boy group made it even more obvious. But even more so than that, Girls' Planet was incredibly experimental, and thus more than a little bit trash. Boys' Planet was a massive upgrade, including a more equal system for global and Korean contestants, better storylines, less evil editing, a better structure in general, and more even grading. It kind of returned to the produce formula after Girls' Planet felt the need to distance itself from it because of the rigging scandal. This has massive implications for the future of Planet 999. Chances are we will never again see 3 KCJ planets, and will instead remain with global and Korean. Chances are the trainees will never come out of the gate ranked again, but will be given stars or something similar. And chances are the 999 will basically be dropped from the name. I expect future seasons of the show to look far more like Boys' Planet and far more like Produce than they look like Girls' Planet. They'll probably have similar missions, similar group selection methods, similar scoring systems, and so on. Mnet and Wake1 saw that Boys' Planet made a much more successful group than Girls' Planet, and they probably didn't consider any confounding factors like the fact that boy groups are generally more popular, their bad management of Kep1er, and so on. They probably just saw that Boys' Planet and ZEROBASEONE were more successful and will uncritically go on with that system from now on. There are many issues I have with the system and structure of Boys' Planet and Produce in general, but the biggest issue I have is, why did they not wear the dresses from Girls' Planet? The Produce seasons had a class theme where both boys and girls wore similar looking school uniforms, but in Girls' Planet the girls wore these lilac skirts and crop tops, and in Boys' Planet, instead of wearing those same skirts or even a lilac suit, because I'll accept, they don't want to put boys in skirts, for some unknown reason they decided to put them in these boring suits. I was so disappointed. Put them in lilac skirts, Mnet, have courage. Make a connection between the male and female seasons. What a cop-out. Anyway. Basically, the success of ZEROBASEONE will likely mean that we see more Planet 999 seasons similar to Boys' Planet, and that we see more boy groups debut with fresh concepts. It's also very possible that the success of ZEROBASEONE is what kickstarted Kep1er's renewal conversations, as it's very possible the companies involved realised that if they get their shit together, Kep1er could actually be super popular. Or maybe they just gave up all hope for those 9 girls in the future, like in IOI. Or maybe Mnet and Wake1 just want more money, or likely it's a bit of all three. It does make me wonder. ZEROBASEONE is a 9-member project boy group run by Wake One Entertainment and created through the K-pop survival show Boys Planet. The group is super bizarre, both individually and as a whole unit. Each of the members have their own unique things which make them more than a little bit weird, in their own unique ways. I thought it was fascinating how unique they were in the show and in the industry, and so in this video I have discussed each of them in order, starting with Yujin at rank 9, moving up, until I took a massive tangent for Gunwook. Whoops. And then moving up to rank 1 with Zhanghao. I also took a tangent to talk about the ZEROBASEONE Romance, a weird thing which was created by the show through mixing and matching storylines. I then discussed some other weird things in the group, such as their obsession with trends from the 2010s. Then I discussed some general trends in the group and their potential impact on the industry. Basically, they all had amazing characters which made people like them. Thus, they made it into the group, and with the group's huge success, they ushered in the 5th gen. Or kind of. To see my thoughts on whether 5th gen actually exists, see episode 4. But ZEROBASEONE have likely had a big impact on the industry, even if it hasn't quite come to fruition yet. The continuation of the Planet 999 series and impacts on how it is likely to run, likely the upcoming debut of more boy groups, the start of 5th gen, growth of unusual pre-debut histories being celebrated, and the possible renewal of Kepler's contracts. Also, they have a heterophobic Chinese centre. That's all that really needs to be said. I initially wanted to make this episode because I wanted to talk about Gunwook. Duh. But I thought it would be more appropriate to talk about the group in general. I think I have fulfilled both of these goals, over 20,000 words, and with nothing left to say other than the stuff I literally can't express in words, like how are Zhanghao and Hanbin so perfect and how in the world does Gunwook look so happy when he spouts pickup line after pickup line? It's crazy and literally can't be expressed in words. So with that, I hope you've discovered more about the hilarious weirdness of ZEROBASEONE and their origins, their members, fun facts, and so on. I wanted to cover this topic before I covered the actual show itself, since this is kind of, the final conclusions about the show. But I would like to analyse how the show itself actually created these storylines through editing, music, and so on. So hopefully I'll see you again when I actually get around to that one. Anyway, that's everything I wanted to say. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next episode.